Welcome to Module 5.6 of your GED Social Studies preparation. Today, we're focusing on one of the most critical skills for test success: identifying bias and evaluating sources. Approximately 30% of your GED Social Studies questions will require you to analyze the credibility, perspective, and reliability of different sources. Let's start by understanding different source types and what makes them credible. Primary sources provide direct evidence from the time period being studied. These include original documents, eyewitness accounts, photographs, and official records. Secondary sources analyze or interpret primary sources, like textbooks, documentaries, and scholarly articles written later. For source credibility factors, examine the author's expertise and credentials. Are they qualified to write about this topic? Check the publication date and relevance. Is the information current enough to be accurate? Consider the publisher's reputation and standards. Do they have editorial oversight and fact-checking processes? Finally, identify the purpose and intended audience. Is this meant to inform, persuade, or entertain? Now let's examine common types of bias you'll encounter. Selection bias occurs when authors choose only facts that support their position while ignoring contradictory evidence. Confirmation bias happens when people seek information that confirms their existing beliefs. Cultural bias means viewing events through a specific cultural perspective without considering other viewpoints. Temporal bias involves judging historical events by current standards rather than the context of their time. Watch for these bias indicators in sources. Emotional language and loaded words signal the author is trying to influence rather than inform. One-sided presentation of facts means important perspectives are missing. Look for missing context or counter-arguments. Credible sources acknowledge different viewpoints. Finally, overgeneralization and stereotypes indicate the author is making broad claims without sufficient evidence. Understanding the author's purpose is crucial for evaluation. To inform means presenting facts objectively without trying to influence opinion. To persuade involves convincing readers to accept a particular viewpoint or take action. To entertain focuses on engaging the audience emotionally rather than providing factual information. To sell means promoting a product, service, or idea for personal gain. Look for perspective clues in the writing. Word choice and tone reveal the author's attitude toward the subject. Notice what information is emphasized. This shows what the author considers most important. Pay attention to what information is omitted. Missing details can be as revealing as included ones. Consider the assumptions about the audience. Is the author writing for experts, general public, or people who already agree with them? Historical context factors help you understand why sources were created and shaped as they were. The time period when the source was created affects the available information and perspective. The social and political climate influences what authors feel safe or motivated to write. Available technology and knowledge determine what information was accessible. Cultural norms and values of the era shape what seemed acceptable or important to discuss. For point-of-view analysis, ask these key questions. Who is the intended audience? Scholars, politicians, or general public? What is the author's background, their education, profession, and personal experiences? What events influence this perspective? Recent wars, economic changes, or social movements? How might others view this differently? Consider gender, class, race, and geographic differences in perspective. When comparing multiple sources, look for consistent facts across different authors and publications. This suggests reliability. Identify conflicting information and try to understand why sources disagree. Note different interpretations of the same events. This helps you understand various perspectives. Evaluate which sources are most reliable based on credibility factors we discussed earlier. Watch for red flags that indicate unreliable sources. No author or publication information makes it impossible to verify credibility. Extreme or inflammatory language suggests bias rather than objective reporting. Claims without supporting evidence cannot be verified or trusted. Sources that contradict established historical facts require extra scrutiny and verification from other sources. For quick evaluation during the test, follow these steps. Scan source information first: author, publication, and date. Identify the author's purpose and intended audience from the content and tone. Look for bias indicators like emotional language or one-sided arguments. Check the publication date and historical context to understand the perspective. Compare with other sources if multiple sources are provided in the question. You'll encounter these common GED question types. Which source would be most reliable for requires you to evaluate credibility factors. The author's perspective can best be described as asks you to identify the author's viewpoint or bias. This source shows bias because tests your ability to recognize bias indicators. Based on the sources, which statement is most accurate requires comparing multiple sources to find supported conclusions. Use this source analysis checklist for systematic evaluation. Who wrote this and when helps establish credibility and context. What was happening historically provides background for understanding perspective. What is the author trying to accomplish reveals their purpose and potential bias. What evidence supports their claims shows the strength of their argument. What perspectives are missing indicates possible selection bias. How does this compare to other sources helps verify accuracy. For time management during the test, spend about 45 seconds analyzing sources before answering questions. Focus on the most obvious bias indicators first: extreme language, missing information, or clear purpose to persuade. Use process of elimination to remove obviously wrong answers. Don't overthink your analysis. If you followed the systematic approach, trust your evaluation and move forward confidently. Let's recap the essential skills from this lesson. Remember that 30% of your GED social studies questions will test source evaluation, making this a crucial skill for success. Primary sources provide direct evidence from the time period, while secondary sources offer analysis and interpretation. Always look for bias indicators like emotional language and missing perspectives that might skew the information presented. Consider the historical context and author's purpose to understand why the source was created and how it might be influenced. When multiple sources are available, compare them to identify consistent facts and conflicting interpretations. Most importantly, use systematic analysis rather than gut feelings. Follow the checklist and evaluation steps we've practiced. With these skills, you'll approach source evaluation questions with confidence. Knowing how to quickly and accurately assess credibility and identify bias on your GED test.